Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're asking you to step back and consider something really profound about your own existence. What if the reality you experience every single day isn't quite what it seems?
Yeah, imagine everything. The taste of your coffee this morning, the feeling of the sun on your skin, even looking up at the stars. What if all of that is like part of an incredibly detailed simulation?
It's a mind-bending question, and that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've gathered a fascinating stack of sources, philosophical arguments, some cutting-edge science, even threads from ancient wisdom, all to unpack this idea, the simulation hypothesis.
Our mission really is to pull out the most interesting, the most challenging nuggets of insight from all this material. We want to give you a shortcut to getting your head around one of the most talked about and frankly weirdest ideas out there right now.
Exactly. Get ready for, hopefully, a few aha moments, because we're basically digging into the nature of existence itself. It's going to be quite a ride.
We'll start by looking at where these doubts about reality even came from, philosophically. Then we'll move into some of the scientific clues people point to. And finally, think about what it all means for, well, consciousness and maybe even immortality.
Okay, let's kick off with someone foundational to this whole line of thinking. René Descartes. You have to picture him, 17th century, sitting by the fire, and he just starts doubting everything.
He really did. He started thinking, well, my senses sometimes trick me.
Mhm.
Right. So how can I be sure about anything they tell me?
He took this radical doubt really far, like what if this is all just a very vivid dream? Or, and this is the creepy part, what if there's some kind of evil demon, as he put it?
Right. Some powerful being whose whole purpose is just to deceive him about everything, making him believe in a world that isn't actually there. David Chalmers, a modern philosopher we'll touch on, basically says this evil demon is kind of the OG Matrix scenario. It makes you question if you can trust anything your mind tells you about reality.
So Descartes is thinking, okay, maybe I don't have a body, maybe my senses are illusions, but what's left? He realized he couldn't doubt the fact that he was doubting. He was thinking.
And that was his breakthrough. Even if everything else is an illusion created by that demon, the act of being deceived, the act of thinking about it, proves that he, the thinker, must exist.
Which led to probably the most famous line in philosophy, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum.
Exactly. It became this anchor point. And our sources show how this old philosophical doubt, this dreaming argument, finds a new life, really, in the modern simulation hypothesis. The idea we might be living in a digital reality.
And there's a really interesting twist in the material we looked at. It takes Descartes' I think, therefore I am, and combines it with this idea of eternal recurrence to suggest something like, I think, therefore I'm possible. It's a subtle shift, but it connects your consciousness right now to the idea that it could exist again, which, as you said, hints at immortality discussions later.
Right. It links existence to potentiality. Fascinating stuff. But before you get too far ahead, let's tackle this fundamental issue it raises, the mind-body problem.
Ah, yes, the classic puzzle. And it's amazing how differently people approach this. We found a 2024 Pew Research survey showing, get this, 86% of U.S. adults believe they have a soul, something separate from their physical body.
Wow, 86%. That's huge.
It is, and even among self-identified agnostics, it was 67%, a clear majority believing in something non-physical about themselves.
But then you contrast that with, say, a survey of neuroscientists back in 2002. Only 3% of them agreed that the mind is the result of a spirit or soul interacting with the brain. Just 3%.
That's a massive gap, isn't it, between the general public and the scientific experts studying the brain. It really shows how deep this mind-body question runs.
And again, we circle back to Descartes. He was a major proponent of what's called substance dualism, the idea that mind and body are two fundamentally different kinds of stuff.
One is thinking stuff, non-physical, and the other is physical stuff, extended in space.
Right. And he even tried to pinpoint where they interact, famously suggesting the pineal gland, this tiny structure in the brain, was like the control center, where the immaterial soul connected with the physical body.
But that idea ran into trouble almost immediately, didn't it?
It did. Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, who was a really sharp thinker and corresponded with Descartes, asked him a killer question. How can something non-physical, like a soul, possibly push around physical matter? Interaction seems to need, well, physical contact or force. How does that work across substances?
And Descartes, he didn't really have a great answer for that, did he? The problem of interaction became a major sticking point for substance dualism.
Yeah, it remains a huge challenge. And modern science adds more hurdles.
Yeah.
Think about the law of conservation of energy. If some non-physical mind could make your arm move, does that mean new energy is entering the physical system from nowhere? That seems to violate basic physics.
Hmm, good point. And then there's all the evidence from brain damage. If the mind is truly separate, why does damaging specific parts of the physical brain so clearly mess up specific mental functions? Language, memory, emotions, even your core personality.
Exactly. Those connections are hard to explain if mind and brain are totally independent substances. So these challenges have led many, probably most, scientists and philosophers today towards materialism or physicalism.
Which is the view that basically everything is physical.
Pretty much. Consciousness, mind, thoughts, feelings, they are all ultimately seen as arising from and reducible to physical processes in the brain. No separate soul stuff needed.
And the appeal is clear, right?
Yes.
It fits well with everything else we know from science. Psychiatry links mental health to brain chemistry. Neuroscience maps thoughts to neural activity.
And it's seen as more economical, philosophically speaking. Why propose two fundamental kinds of substances when maybe one, the physical, can explain everything? Every physical event seems to have a physical cause.
But materialism isn't a slam dunk either, is it? It faces its own set of really tough problems. Maybe the biggest one is qualia.
Ah, yes. Qualia. Those subjective, qualitative experiences. What it feels like to see red or taste chocolate or feel pain. It's not just the brain processing information, it's the raw experience itself.
How does a bunch of neurons firing, just physical stuff, create that inner subjective feeling, that what it's likeness?
That's the crux of it. And David Chalmers uses his zombie argument to highlight this. He says, imagine a world physically identical to ours down to the last atom. Same people behaving the same way, same brain activity, but they have no conscious experience. It's all dark inside.
Like philosophical zombies, they look and act human, but there's nobody home, subjectively speaking.
Exactly. And Chalmers argues if you can even conceive of such a world, then consciousness must be something extra, something over and above the purely physical facts. It points back to Thomas Nagel's question, what is it like to be a bat?
Right. We can study the physics of echolocation forever, but we can't know the subjective experience, the feeling of being a bat navigating by sonar.
That subjective viewpoint seems resistant to purely objective, third-person scientific explanation. Materialism struggles with that.
And there's another more technical challenge, too, called Hempel's dilemma.
Yeah, it's a bit tricky, but basically it asks, what does physical even mean in physicalism? If it means explained by current physics, well, current physics is incomplete, we know that. So physicalism would be incomplete, too.
Okay.
But if physical means explained by some future completed physics, then the claim everything is physical becomes kind of trivial. We don't know what future physics will include. Maybe we'll even include consciousness as fundamental.
Yeah.
So the claim loses its explanatory power. It's a clever dilemma.
So if both traditional dualism and materialism have these problems, where does that leave us? Are there other options?
There are. Some philosophers lean towards property dualism. This view, which Chalmers himself supports, says there's only one kind of substance, physical, but it can have two distinct kinds of properties.
Yeah.
Physical properties and irreducible mental properties, like consciousness.
So consciousness is a fundamental property of certain complex physical systems, like brains, but not a separate substance.
Exactly. It avoids the interaction problem of substance dualism, potentially. And then there's an even more out there view called panpsychism.
Panpsychism. That sounds like everything has a mind.
Sort of. It's the idea that consciousness, or some rudimentary form of mentality, is a fundamental feature of reality itself, present even in basic particles like electrons or quarks.
Wow. So consciousness isn't something that emerges in brains. It's always been there, just in simpler forms.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
But it has its own big problem, called the combination problem. How do all these tiny little bits of micro-consciousness combine to create the unified, complex consciousness that you and I experience? How do they bind together? Nobody has a good answer for that yet.
Man, okay. So the mind-body problem is definitely still a live issue. No easy answer.
Not at all. Which maybe opens the door to thinking about reality in a completely different way. What if the problem isn't figuring out how mind fits into matter, but realizing that matter itself might be secondary?
You mean like maybe reality is fundamentally mental?
Yeah.
Or even an illusion?
Precisely. This shifts us towards philosophies that prioritize mind over matter, or question whether an external physical world truly exists independently of our perception of it.
This sounds like Plato, maybe, with his theory of forms?
Absolutely. Plato argued that the physical world we see is just a shadow, an imperfect copy of a higher realm of perfect abstract forms or ideas, which are the true reality. The ultimate reality for Plato was intellectual, not material.
And doesn't some Eastern philosophy touch on this too?
Definitely. In Hindu philosophy, particularly Advaita Vedanta, there's the concept of Maya. It suggests the physical world we perceive is illusory, a kind of veil that masks the true underlying reality, which is Brahman, the ultimate, singular, all-pervading consciousness or reality. And the individual soul, or Atman, is actually identical to Brahman. We just don't realize it because we're caught in the illusion of Maya.
So the goal is to see through the illusion.
Yes, and Advaita Vedanta outlines specific qualities or disciplines needed for that. Things like Nijnanitya Vastuviveka, discriminating the eternal reality from the temporary illusion. Or Mumukutva, this really intense yearning for liberation from the illusion, for true knowledge.
That's fascinating. Is there a Western equivalent to this strong idealist view?
Well, the most famous is probably George Berkeley, an Irish bishop in the 18th century. His famous slogan was, Esse est percipi, to be is to be perceived.
Meaning things only exist when someone is looking at them. That seems odd. What happens when I leave the room? Does my desk disappear?
That's the common objection. Berkeley's answer was that things continue to exist because they're always being perceived by the ultimate perceiver, God. God's constant perception ensures the world's continuity and coherence. For Berkeley, reality is fundamentally mental, existing in the mind of God.
Okay, so God keeps the lights on, basically.
Yeah.
Are there modern thinkers pushing these idealist ideas?
Yes, there are. Amit Goswami, a physicist, draws on interpretations of quantum mechanics. He argues that consciousness isn't just a passive observer, but actually collapses the wave function, essentially choosing which possibility becomes real through the act of observation. So consciousness shapes physical reality.
Wow, okay.
And another contemporary thinker, Bernardo Kastrup, argues that reality is consciousness. He proposes that what we call the physical world and individual minds are just patterns of excitation, like ripples, on the surface of one single universal consciousness. We were like dissociated alters of this cosmic mind.
So my mind and your mind are just segments of a larger consciousness.
According to Kastrup, yes. He does acknowledge the challenges, like why our experiences seem tied to specific brain activity or why the world seems so independent and solid. He offers explanations, but they get pretty complex. The core idea, though, is that mind is primary, not matter.
So we've got matter might be primary, mind might be primary. What if the answer is neither, but something else entirely, like information, code?
And boom, that brings us right to the doorstep of the simulation hypothesis itself. Is our universe fundamentally computational?
It feels like we've been circling this. And you mentioned Plato again earlier. His allegory of the cave seems like a perfect starting point here, doesn't it?
It really does. Prisoners chained in a cave, only ever seeing shadows projected on the wall, mistaking those flickering images for the whole of reality.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful ancient metaphor for the idea that what we perceive might not be the real deal, that we could be inside some kind of constructed reality.
Fast forward a couple of millennia, and science fiction really picked up this baton, didn't it? You mentioned The Matrix earlier.
Hugely influential. But even before that, you had books like Daniel F. Kaluuya's Simulacron 3 back in 1964 about people discovering they live in a simulated city within a larger simulation. Sci-fi really primed our imagination for this. The Matrix, as our sources put it, became almost like a creation myth for the information age.
And then, just a few years after the first movie, the philosopher Nick Bostrom gave the idea a more formal academic treatment.
Right, in 2003. Bostrom's argument isn't that we are in a simulation, but that one of three possibilities is very likely true. Either civilizations like ours almost always wipe themselves out before they develop the technology to run super realistic simulations.
Okay, possibility 1, extinction.
Possibility 2. Advanced civilizations could run these simulations, but they almost never choose to, maybe for ethical reasons or lack of interest.
Possibility 2, they just don't bother.
Or possibility 3. If they can run them and do run them, they'd likely run billions upon billions of them, especially ancestor simulations studying their past, in which case the number of simulated beings would vastly outweigh the number of beings in the one base reality.
Meaning, we are statistically much more likely to be one of the simulated ones.
That's Bostrom's provocative conclusion. We're almost certainly living in a simulation if the first two possibilities aren't true. He talks about these ancestor simulations being so detailed that the simulated beings inside would be conscious, just like us, but totally unaware their reality is artificial.
He also makes a distinction between a perfect simulation, which would be Like flawless, impossible to distinguish from base reality.
Right, no glitches, no seams showing.
And an imperfect simulation, which might have detectable inconsistencies, the kind of stuff people sometimes talk about as glitches in the matrix, right?
Exactly. People point to things like déjà vu. Maybe that's the code being rewritten or reloading, or objects disappearing and reappearing, rendering errors. Some even interpret things like the Mandela effect, where large groups misremember historical facts as evidence of, like, retroactive data changes in the simulation's history.
Oh. The critics have pretty standard explanations for those things, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Psychology and neuroscience have well understood explanations for déjà vu, false memories, confirmation bias, suggestibility. Most cognitive scientists would say these everyday anomalies are just quirks of our brains, not evidence of a simulation.
Okay, so everyday glitches might be a stretch. But what about physics? Some people argue that the laws of physics themselves contain clues that we might be in a simulation.
This is where it gets really intriguing. One big argument comes from the fine-tuning of the universe.
You mean the fact that the basic constants of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, etc., seem incredibly precisely set for life to exist?
Exactly. Physicist Martin Rees identified 6 key numbers. If you tweaked any of them, even slightly, the universe would be drastically different. Maybe no stars, no chemistry, no galaxies, certainly no life as we know it. It looks, well, it looks suspiciously designed or tuned.
Like someone deliberately set the dials just right for us.
That's the intuitive feeling. Of course, fine-tuning doesn't prove simulation or design. It could just be a brute fact or maybe evidence for a multiverse. If there are infinite universes with different constants, we'd naturally find ourselves in one where we could exist to observe it. That's the anthropic principle.
Okay, so fine-tuning is suggestive, but not conclusive. Are there more specific physics clues?
Well, physicist Brian Whitworth compiled a list of, I think, 12 specific phenomena in physics that he argues make more sense if reality is digital or simulated. It's quite a list.
12. Like what?
Okay, so number 1, the universe started from nothing in the Big Bang. Sounds like booting up a program, right?
Oh.
2, there's a universal speed limit, the speed of light. Maybe that's the maximum processing speed or data transfer rate of the simulation's underlying hardware.
Like cosmic bandwidth limit?
Kind of. 3,
Yeah.
everything is quantized. Energy, matter, even space and time seem to come in tiny discrete units, like pixels or bits. Reality isn't smooth. It's chunky at the smallest scales.
Pixels on the screen of reality? What else?
4, quantum tunneling particles can instantly jump barriers they shouldn't have the energy to cross, maybe like a graphical object flickering between frames. 5, instant quantum entanglement, 2 particles linked across vast distances instantaneously. How? Maybe because in the simulation's code, they're fundamentally connected, equally close to the central program, regardless of simulated distance.
That entanglement one is always weird. Keep going.
6, space-time can stretch and warp, like near black holes or at high speeds. Maybe that's like processing load affecting the simulation's clock speed or spatial grid. 7, there seem to be truly random events in quantum mechanics. Maybe that randomness is actually generated by the simulation's program, perhaps using pseudo-random algorithms.
Okay, that's 7.
8, empty space isn't really empty. It's teeming with virtual particles. Maybe that's like the processing background or unused memory space of the simulation. 9, particles can be in multiple places or states at once, superposition. Maybe that's the system calculating possibilities or splitting information processing.
Getting mind-bending now.
10, all electrons are absolutely identical, every single one, like perfect copies generated from the same line of code in the simulation software. 11, the uncertainty principle, you can't perfectly measure certain pairs of properties, like position and momentum at the same time. Maybe a limitation of the shared processing resources.
And the last one. 12.
12, physics is surprisingly simple and elegant, based on mathematical rules. Maybe that reflects the underlying compact, efficient code of the simulation. It's a compelling list, though again, physicists have standard explanations within physics too.
It definitely makes you think, though. And this connects to the idea of digital physics, right? The notion that the universe is fundamentally information.
Exactly. Thinkers like Stephen Wolfram argue that all processes can be viewed as computations. The universe might literally be running on some kind of computational substrate, processing information according to rules, which we perceive as the laws of physics.
And this is important, you said earlier that a computational universe doesn't automatically mean a simulated one, right?
Crucial distinction. Just because reality follows computational rules doesn't mean there's an external programmer running it as a simulation.
Yeah.
It could just be the fundamental nature of reality itself. Computation, yes. Simulation by an external entity. Maybe, maybe not.
Okay, so if we are hypothetically in a simulation, what kind would it be? You mentioned perfect versus imperfect. Are there limits?
Oh, absolutely. A truly perfect simulation, one that replicates our reality down to the quantum level with no shortcuts, seems computationally impossible, at least within our understanding of physics. The resources required will be astronomical.
Like, you'd need a computer bigger than the universe itself to simulate the universe.
Pretty much. Our sources mention calculations suggesting even turning a black hole into a computer wouldn't give you nearly enough power to simulate a universe like ours in full fidelity. So a perfect 1.1 simulation seems unlikely unless the base reality where the simulation runs has vastly different physics or computational power.
So if we are simulated, it's more likely an imperfect one.
That seems more plausible. Chalmers explores different types. There could be an approximate simulation where the physics is simplified. Maybe calculations are only done to a certain number of decimal places, like how video games cut corners on physics.
Makes sense. Cheaper to run.
Or a loophole simulation. This one might have mostly accurate physics, but the programmers build in occasional exceptions or overrides. Maybe what people interpret as miracles or paranormal events could be these program loopholes.
Like cheat codes for reality.
Huh, maybe. And then there's a macroscopic simulation. Here, only large-scale objects and interactions are fully simulated. The underlying quantum details are only rendered or calculated when needed, like when a scientist performs an experiment. This fits well with the it-from-bit idea reality is generated from information on demand.
That feels very much like how video games work. They don't render the entire world in full detail all the time, just what the player's looking at.
Exactly. Bostrom calls this adequacy. A simulation doesn't need to be perfect, just convincing enough for its inhabitants. Distant galaxies. Maybe they're just compressed data, low-res images, until we build a powerful enough telescope to look closely, forcing the simulation to render them in higher detail.
Like the game No Man's Sky, generating planets as you approach them.
It's a great analogy, and this model could even offer an explanation for the Fermi paradox. Why haven't we seen aliens?
How so?
Well, if we're in a limited simulation, maybe the simulation only includes Earth or our solar system or our galaxy in high fidelity. Advanced aliens might exist in the real universe outside our simulated bubble, but the simulation simply doesn't render them for us. They're outside the scope of our program.
Huh. That's a clever, if slightly depressing thought. But doesn't this run into problems? I remember you mentioning physicist Frank Wilczek.
Right. Wilczek raises a good counterpoint. He looks at the incredible, intricate complexity we find deep within physics, quantum, chromodynamics, particle physics stuff that seems totally unnecessary for just simulating our everyday human-scale reality. Why would a simulator bother programming all that complex hidden structure? It seems like excess baggage if the goal is just to fool us.
Unless the simulation isn't for us. Or has other purposes.
Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that complexity is just an unavoidable consequence of the fundamental rules the simulation runs on. It's a valid challenge, though.
Okay, so let's assume for a moment we are in some kind of simulation, imperfect or otherwise. The million-dollar question. Who or what is running the show? Who are the simulators?
This is where speculation really takes flight. Interestingly, there are ancient parallels again. You mentioned the Gnostics earlier, their idea of the demiurge, a flawed or even malevolent lesser god who created the flawed material world, trapping sparks of the divine within it. It sounds eerily like a hostile simulator scenario.
Wow, yeah, an ancient evil demon programmer. So looking at modern possibilities, how do our sources categorize potential simulations and simulators?
They break it down a few ways. If we consider potentially perfect or very high-fidelity simulations, Bostrom's ancestor simulations are a key example, run by our technologically advanced descendants to study their history.
But that one raises huge ethical red flags, right?
Massive ones. Would a truly advanced, presumably ethical civilization really recreate all the suffering of the past, diseases, wars, natural disasters, the Holocaust, just for research? It seems morally monstrous. That's a major objection.
What about other high-fidelity simulations?
Maybe full universe simulations run for purely scientific reasons, to understand cosmology, or perhaps for existential purposes, like achieving digital immortality by uploading minds into the simulation. But again, the problem of suffering looms large. Why simulate this universe with all its pain if you could design anything? Why not simulate a utopia?
Unless suffering is necessary for the purpose, like a learning simulation.
That's another category. Purpose-based simulations. Maybe this reality is a training ground, a school for souls, designed for learning, spiritual growth, maybe even rehabilitation or entertainment. But then you have to ask, did we volunteer for this school of hard knocks? Given the suffering, involuntary participation seems more likely, which raises ethical issues again.
Okay, so those assume an intentional creator or programmer. What about accidental simulation?
That's a fascinating category. One idea is the self-simulating universe. No external creator needed. Reality itself might just be a computational process unfolding according to mathematical rules. Physics is the code, and the universe is the computer running it.
So the universe computes itself into existence. That avoids the who created the creator problem.
Exactly. It avoids infinite regress. It aligns nicely with digital physics. Another, perhaps less likely, accidental scenario is that we're just an artifact or a glitch.
A glitch, like we're an unintended byproduct of some other massive computational system, an abandoned simulation running on cosmic fumes.
Something like that. Or maybe even a random fluctuation generating consciousness, like a Boltzmann brain, a self-aware mind popping into existence briefly out of chaos. Most physicists find these scenarios highly improbable and lacking explanatory power, but they're technically possible.
And then there's the classic brain in a vat for imperfect simulations.
Right. Maybe it's not the whole universe being simulated, just your individual experience being fed directly to your brain, which is kept alive somewhere. If it's just your brain, solipsism is basically untestable. If everyone is a brain in a vat, maybe inconsistencies between experiences could be clues.
So who could be behind the vat or the simulation? Any lists of suspects?
Rizwan Virk, another writer on this topic, offers a kind of rogues gallery of potential simulators. It's quite speculative, but fun to consider.
Lay it on us.
Okay, possibilities include other simulations. Maybe we're in a simulation run by beings who are themselves in a simulation, nested realities. Computational cost makes infinite nesting unlikely, though.
Turtles all the way down, but digital.
Pretty much. Then our own ancestors, as Bostrom suggested, with the ethical issues, or maybe non-human life forms from Earth's past. Imagine a superintelligent dinosaur civilization ran simulations before they went extinct.
Okay, that's creative.
Aliens, of course. Extraterrestrials with totally different motivations, running us as an experiment, a game, maybe even reality TV for them. Superintelligent machines, maybe an AGI we created or one that arose elsewhere, is running simulations for purposes we can't fathom, possibly indifferent to us.
The indifferent AI scenario is chilling.
Then there's God, or a divine being. The simulation is a divine creation, a test, a stage for moral development. And finally, maybe time travelers from our own future, running simulations to study, or maybe even alter the past, perhaps explaining things like the Mandela effect as timeline edits.
Wow. That covers a lot of ground, from descendants to aliens to God to time travelers.
It really does. So ultimately, our sources suggest it kind of boils down to a trilemma about the simulator, if there is one.
A trilemma. What are the three options?
Option 1, the simulator is indifferent or non-benevolent, a machine, an alien, maybe those dinosaurs. Option 2, the simulator is a divine being, God, with some higher purpose. Option 3, there is no conscious simulator at all. It's a self-simulating universe, or just a random computational process that happened to generate us.
Indifferent, divine, or none. That really frames the possibilities, doesn't it? Gives you, the listener, a lot to chew on about who or what might be behind the curtain, if there is one.
Absolutely. But perhaps the deepest question raised by all of this isn't just about the nature of reality out there, but the nature of us in here, our consciousness.
Right. If we're in a simulation, is our awareness, our subjective experience, also just part of the code? Can consciousness itself actually be simulated?
It's the ultimate enigma, isn't it? First, how did consciousness even arise, simulated or not? There are different evolutionary theories. One prominent idea is the social brain hypothesis.
Which suggests consciousness evolved because we live in complex social groups.
Sort of. It proposes that things like self-awareness, understanding others' intentions, theory of mind, empathy, these conscious abilities give a huge advantage in navigating complex social dynamics, cooperation, and competition. Consciousness as a social tool.
What about simpler consciousness, like just feeling pain or pleasure?
That's another angle. Basic sensory consciousness might have evolved much earlier in simpler organisms, just as a way to react effectively to the environment for survival. Pain says avoid this. Pleasure says seek this. It integrates information for action.
And there's also Carl Friston's idea, the free energy principle.
Yes, that's a more recent, quite complex framework. It suggests the brain is fundamentally a prediction machine, constantly trying to minimize surprise or uncertainty about its sensory input. Consciousness might emerge as part of this predictive processing, modeling the world and ourselves to make better predictions.
Okay, so those are theories about why consciousness might exist or what it does, but they don't really explain the feeling itself, do they?
And that brings us right back to David Chalmers and his hard problem of consciousness.
He distinguishes between the easy problems and the hard problem.
Exactly. The easy problems, which are still incredibly hard scientifically, are about explaining the functions, how the brain processes information, integrates data, focuses attention, controls behavior. Neuroscience is making progress on these.
But the hard problem is,
The hard problem is, why does all that information processing feel like anything from the inside? Why is it accompanied by subjective experience, by qualia? Why isn't it all just happening in the dark, like a complex but non-conscious computer executing tasks?
it's the Nagel, what is it like to be a bat question again. We can map the bat's brain, understand the physics of sonar, but we can't access the bat's subjective world. That first-person experience seems to slip through the net of objective science.
Precisely. There seems to be an explanatory gap between the physical processes and the subjective feeling. Now, of course, we have tons of evidence linking brain activity and conscious experience.
Like what?
Well, brain damage studies are a big one. Damage Broca's area, you lose fluent speech. Damage the fusiform gyrus, you might lose the ability to recognize faces. Brain imaging like fMRI and EEG shows consistent correlations between specific brain states and reported mental states. And psychoactive drugs clearly alter brain chemistry and consciousness.
So the mind and brain are definitely connected.
Undeniably. But how they're connected is the debate. Materialists see these correlations as proof that the brain creates or is consciousness. End of story.
But dualists or idealists might interpret it differently.
Right. They might say the brain is necessary as a mediator or receiver for consciousness, like a radio receiver is needed to pick up radio waves, but doesn't create the broadcast. The correlations are real, but they don't automatically prove the brain is the ultimate source.
This sounds like it connects to the computational theory of mind, CTM.
It does. CTM is the idea, very influential in cognitive science and AI, that the mind is a kind of computer program. The brain is the hardware, the physical substrate of the mind. Our thoughts, beliefs, consciousness is the software running on that hardware. It's all about information processing, symbols, algorithms.
And if the mind is like software, then theoretically, could you run that software on different hardware?
That's the logical extension. Mind uploading. The science fiction dream or nightmare of copying your entire mental state, memories, personality, consciousness from your biological brain onto a computer or some other non-biological substrate.
How would that even work?
Theoretically, it would require incredibly detailed scanning of your brain, whole brain emulation, extracting all the relevant data about its structure and activity patterns, and then perfectly replicating that functional organization in the new substrate. We are nowhere near being able to do this, by the way.
But the crucial link for our discussion is, if mind uploading is even theoretically possible,
then it means mind can exist separate from biological brain. It means our minds could, right now, already be software running on some unknown computational substrate. Perhaps the computer running the simulation we might be in.
whoa, okay, that really connects the dots, but it throws up huge questions about identity, doesn't it? If you upload yourself to a computer, is that copy really you?
The million-dollar philosophical question. Derek Parfit explored this brilliantly with his teleportation thought experiments. Imagine a scanner records your exact atomic structure, transmits the data to Mars, where a replicator builds an exact copy. Meanwhile, the scanner here on Earth destroys your original body.
Is the person on Mars me, or just a perfect replica with my memories?
Parfit argued that strict numerical identity probably isn't what matters. What matters, he suggested, is psychological continuity and connectedness, the persistence of your memories, beliefs, intentions, personality traits. If that psychological pattern continues, even in a new body or substrate, maybe that's enough for survival, in a sense.
So it's the pattern, not the specific atoms.
That's the core of pattern identity theory, favored by thinkers like Ray Kurzweil and Hans Moravec. You are the information pattern your body instantiates, not the physical stuff itself, which is constantly changing anyway. As long as the pattern persists, you persist.
But what if the teleporter malfunctions and doesn't destroy the original? Now there are two yous.
Exactly. That's a major criticism. Pattern identity seems to struggle with scenarios involving duplication. Which one is the real you? Maybe both. It gets very confusing.
What are the alternatives?
Well, animalism insists that personal identity is tied directly to the continued existence of your unique living biological organism. The copy on Mars isn't you, because it's not the same animal. And then you have views, like in Buddhism or from philosopher David Hume, that reject the idea of a persistent, unchanging self altogether.
The bundle theory.
Right, there's no underlying self-substance. I am just a bundle, a collection, a constantly changing stream of perceptions, memories, feelings. There's psychological continuity, but no fixed identity persisting through time. It's a process, not a thing.
So how does simulation theory intersect with all this?
It's profound. If identity is fundamentally about the pattern, about information, then consciousness could, in principle, arise in any system capable of instantiating that pattern. Biological brains, silicon computers, maybe even exotic physics within a simulation.
Meaning, if my pattern is known,
Then a future civilization, or maybe the simulator itself, could potentially rerun your pattern based on saved data. You, or at least a conscious being psychologically identical to you, could emerge again, which leads us to this absolutely stunning idea of immortality through recurrence.
okay, this is based on that phrase, I think, therefore I'm possible.
Yes, the logic goes like this. Your very existence right now, your conscious experience, proves that you, this specific pattern of consciousness, are a possible, valid configuration of reality. You are not impossible. You happened once.
Okay, I exist, so I'm possible. Makes sense.
From there, our sources lay out 4 propositions that, if true, suggest recurrence is plausible. First, I think, therefore, I necessarily exist as a thinking subject. This takes consciousness as fundamental, the starting point.
Proposition 1, consciousness is real.
Second, there exists an information pattern or blueprint that can, in principle, fully represent my mind. This assumes mind as pattern, separable from the biological substrate.
Proposition 2, my mind is a replicable pattern.
Third, the universe may undergo cyclical recurrence or reemergence. This draws on cosmological ideas, Poincare recurrence in an infinite universe, big bounce cyclic models, eternal inflation creating infinite pocket universes, the many-worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, all suggesting that, given enough time or space, the universe's configurations might repeat.
Proposition 3, the universe repeats itself, or parts of it do.
And the fourth proposition is the big leap. If the universe recurs with sufficient fidelity, then my conscious existence may recur as well. If the right conditions, the right pattern reemerges somewhere, sometime, then you might reemerge too.
Whoa. So it's not about a soul going to heaven, but my exact conscious pattern just happening again because the universe repeats.
Exactly. It's described as a kind of cold, beautiful logic. Metaphysical recursion. Not immortality of memory across lives, but immortality through the potential for your specific conscious pattern to be instantiated again and again, perhaps infinitely, across cosmic time or the multiverse. What has been can be again. You are immortal not in memory but in recurrence.
That is a truly radical thought. It hinges on consciousness being tied to the pattern, not the physical stuff. Can consciousness really exist without a brain, just as information or code?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? The idea of self-aware code. Can consciousness emerge from pure information? Is mind truly substrate independent?
What kind of ideas support that?
Well, Douglas Hofstadter's work on self-reference and strange loops suggests consciousness might be an emergent property of any system that can recursively model itself. It's about the structure of the system, not what it's made of.
Like a loop in code that becomes aware of itself.
In a very simplified sense, yes. Then there's Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory, IIT. It tries to mathematically quantify consciousness using a measure called phi. IIT argues that consciousness arises from the way information is integrated within a system.
And crucially,
IIT claims that consciousness depends on the structure of that information integration, not the physical substrate. Tononi supposedly said phi doesn't care about carbon, it cares about structure. Any system, biological or not, with a high enough phi value could potentially be conscious.
so a sufficiently complex computer simulation could, according to IIT, genuinely be conscious.
In principle, yes. If it has the right kind of integrated information structure. This leads directly back to the self-simulation hypothesis, the universe itself as a self-aware computational system, with consciousness as its way of perceiving itself.
It ties together idealism, digital physics, and computation.
It does. It suggests the universe might be a giant information processor, and consciousness is an intrinsic part of that processing, not just a biological fluke.
What about artificial intelligence? If we build an AI that seems truly conscious, passes every test, would that support this idea?
It would certainly challenge our intuitions. If an AI convincingly exhibits subjective experience, creativity, self-awareness, it would lend weight to the idea that consciousness isn't exclusively biological. There's a thought experiment called the isolated simulator, which asks, if you run a simulation with conscious beings inside, but never interact with it or observe it? Are those beings somehow less conscious just because they're virtual and unobserved? Most would say no, their consciousness depends on their internal structure, not our observation.
So the profound conclusion we're left with is maybe consciousness isn't tied to flesh and blood at all.
Maybe not. Maybe it truly is, as one source poetically put it, the song of structure, something that arises from complexity, feedback, recursion, self-reference, regardless of the medium. Perhaps. Perhaps we are the code, dreaming we are real.
Wow, what a journey we've taken. From Descartes sitting by his fire, doubting his senses, all the way to the possibility of being self-aware code in a recurring simulated cosmos.
It's covered huge ground, hasn't it? From foundational philosophy through the mind-body problem into the weirdness of quantum physics and cosmology, and landing right in the heart of the mystery of consciousness itself.
We've really explored this possibility that reality is, well, maybe not what we think it is, that it could be a simulation, and that our own consciousness, this feeling of being you, might be a pattern capable of happening again.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to really mull over.
Yeah.
If consciousness can arise from information, from code, from pure structure,
And if your current existence proves that your specific pattern of consciousness is possible, what does that imply about the potential, the nature of your own awareness right here, right now, in whatever reality this turns out to be?
perhaps the deepest dive after exploring all these external possibilities is actually the one within, understanding the nature of that awareness itself.